afternoon or evening or morning to everyone. Welcome in this session organized by the Vehicle Sludge Management Twig of the Global Wash Cluster. I will just wait a few seconds to see if some more people are entering. Yeah, let's start. So welcome everyone at this session where we try to connect FSM general practices with FSM in emergencies while discussing the gap in standards as a shared challenge. My name is Marij Zwart. I work with, I'm a WASH advisor with the Netherlands Red Cross, and in not the next, but the slide after, we will have a little bit more time to introduce us. And we're also looking to understand who is here with us today. Yeah, next slide, please. Thank you. So before we start with the introduction, I'll quickly discuss the content of today's session. First, we will introduce the technical working group of the Global Wash Cluster that's hosting this session. Then we will introduce the standard gap from different perspectives. What do we mean with this gap? Then we'll have a short break. We will discuss the new sanitation quality standards that we developed. We'll go into breakout groups to discuss these standards, which are for emergencies, discussing if there's also an applicability outside of emergencies. We'll have feedback session, and then we close the session. Next slide, please. Great. So yeah, as I said, my name is Marij Zwart, WASH advisor with the Netherlands Red Cross. I did have some network issues, so my colleague Laura Koller is sharing the slides, and she is working with CAST. And Ida Opdam is with us. She's doing his master thesis with the Wageningen University. And then we also have contributions of Mr. Aymang. He will join us through a video. And Mr. Syed Ullah, and Aymang works with Solidarité in Myanmar. And Syed Ullah, he is working with the Bangladeshi Red Crescent, and he also has a contribution. So that's us, but we're also interested in knowing who's with us today. So Lara will launch a poll with some quick questions, if that's possible, while also screen share it.
Do you want to keep the poll up while they... So yeah, we've put up the poll. If everyone could just kind of answer the questions very quickly. We just want to know who's in the room with us today.
Kind of frozen.
It's frozen?
Yes. The submit button is...
It could just be a lot of people are submitting at the same time.
I think you need to scroll down. You haven't finished answering, so you cannot submit if you haven't finished.
Thank you.
Perfect.
You. That was helpful. Thanks.
I'll give everyone a couple more seconds, and then, but overall, it looks like we've got a relative balance between men and women in the group today. And I'll be sharing the results. So I'm going to end the poll, and I'm going to share so everyone can kind of see who's here. So as I was saying, we have a pretty good mix of men and women. It's nice to see that the kind of dominating age group is between 25 and 35, so relatively young group. In terms of kind of experience with fecal sludge management, we have, again, a variety of backgrounds in the room, which I think will make the breakout room discussions quite interesting. And then the kind of dominance for the type of work is from the development sector or side of things, but we also do have some representation from the humanitarian or emergency sector as well. So it's good to see that we have at least a mix of representation today.
Nice, great, thank you. Then I'll go ahead quickly introducing the Global Wash Cluster and the technical working group that we're working with. For some of you, it will be old knowledge, but I just don't want to lose anyone in understanding who is organizing the session. So basically, in very brief, emergency responses, humanitarian aid is organized through a cluster-based coordination mechanism, or coordinated by OCHA, the Office for Humanitarian Action. Basically that is done for each sector, so for WASH, but also for food, for protection. And for WASH, UNICEF is coordinating. That means that UNICEF will coordinate local level WASH clusters. And the map that is shown here shows all the locations where there is currently a WASH cluster active. But there's also a global level WASH cluster, basically global level, HQ level coordination of all the humanitarian actors that are active in the humanitarian sector. So there are 77 humanitarian and research partners, and the objective of the global WASH cluster is to support local emergency responses with the focus on WASH. And this global WASH cluster has a couple of technical working groups, for example, on cash and on for COVID, of course, but there's also a technical working group on fecal sludge management. And that's the one I'm coordinating on behalf of the Netherlands Red Cross. And next slide, please.
All right.
So why is there a fecal sludge management technical working group? In very short, experiences in Haiti and Bangladesh showed the sector that there is a need to improve the quality of sanitation services in emergency responses. And there's a need to improve standards, there's a need for capacity development, for knowledge, for access to tools. So because of that need, the FSM Technical Working Group was activated. We have 20 active members that are all research or humanitarian agencies. And the objective is to jointly work towards improved sanitation services in emergencies. We have 7 working groups, each led by another organization. So the whole list is shown here. And today's session is only talking about standards. And there's a link to our website on that slide if you want to visit that afterwards for more information, and also our members. Yes, thank you, Laura. When we talk about standards in the emergency context, we are directly talking about SWEER, the SWEER handbook. I don't know, maybe probably many of you are familiar with it. The SWEER handbook is basically a set of very simple, straightforward standards for emergency response planning. And that's including all sectors, so also protection, shelter, and WASH. And these SWEER handbook WASH standards, they include standard indicators and key actions to undertake when you are providing humanitarian WASH services. So, for example, on drinking water, they would say to sort of be able to say that you are providing aid, you have to provide minimum 20 liters per person of specific quality with a specific distance to their houses. Standards like that. And Ida will talk more about the standards later. Thank you. New slide, please. For sanitation, the FSM TWIG, this TWIG is the technical working group, we took the initiative to start a participatory process leading to additional sanitation standards, because the current standards, first of all, do not clearly explain under which conditions an on-site solution is safe and when the whole sanitation service chain is required. Also, there is a big focus on latrine design and standards, but there's not a clear focus on standards for the desludging, transport, treatment and disposal of fecal sludge. And the sanitation worker safety is not addressed. On disposal effluent standards, there is a reference to national standards. But yeah, we will also talk more about that later, but some countries don't have them, or they're difficult. They might not be always applicable, but that will be part of the discussion today. And there is no deviation between first phase standards and more long term. So that's why we took the initiative to start that participatory process. Basically, Ida conducted a lot of interviews with people inside and outside of the TWIC. We had another session, the Global WASH Cluster annual partner meeting was a few weeks ago, and we had a satellite session event only on the standards, where we basically had a vote on what our direction should be. Now we have the session to discuss what we came up with, and to also discuss if there is an applicability for these type of standards outside the emergency context as well. So yeah, next slide, please. I think, so that was the introduction of what we've been doing and what we are, the TWIC, and working on the standards. We can now continue to discuss this standard gap that we feel is existing, to approach it from a few different perspectives. So that is from Mr. Sweet-Ula, from Mr. Ayman, and from Mr. Ida, who will give a presentation on the research he's been doing. And next slide, please. Okay, so this is a video. We will quickly switch to Ida's screen to show this video, and we all hope that it will work. We did practice it a few minutes ago, but.
Hi everyone, my name is Imam. I'm 35 years old. I live in Citywide, Cameroon State, Myanmar. I have been working in humanitarian sanitation sector with Solidarity International since 2015 December. I started working as a sludge treatment site agent in sludge treatment site in 2015 December. Then I was promoted as a sludge treatment site officer, and then sanitation officer, then sanitation supervisor, then sanitation activity manager. I like my job. I'm honored to work in humanitarian sanitation sector. It is a kind of life-saving activities. It is making the environment. Hi everyone, my name is Imam. I'm 35 years old. And making a good environment, and it is providing, it is providing a kind of assistance to the beneficiaries to have protection from the disease that caused from sludge. We are only one agency that is leading fecal sludge management operation here in Citywide. We collect sludge from the latrine pits. We have our workers, our staffs. We have dislodging team in the field. Our staffs collect sludge from the latrine, wearing full protection equipment. We have security rules, public health. We have procedures regarding security rules and public health. Our all staffs are following the rules, and they are implementing the process according to standard operating procedure. We collect sludge from the latrine pit by pumping. We drain sludge from the latrine pit to the tank. There are tanks on the tractor, and the tractors carry sludge. The tractor transports sludge from the latrine pit to the treatment site. We take care about protection and security of our staffs in the field, on the transportation way, and inside as well. Our all staffs, it is mandatory to follow security rules for all staffs. Safety of staffs is very important, is essential. Thus, every staff follow the safety rules. I feel safety to work in sanitation sector as we have personal protection equipment. We are taking the PPE such as wearing gloves, boots, face mask, helmet, and etc. We are only one agency that is providing fecal sludge, that is leading fecal sludge management process here. We have emergency response team to respond for emergency sanitation service. We have our community mobilization team in the field, and we have whenever we receive any complaints from the beneficiaries for dislodging, and we prioritize to dislodge. We prioritize the complaints that we receive from communities, from beneficiaries, and we prioritize to dislodge overflowing latrines, because if the latrines overflows too much, it impacts the beneficiary. The beneficiary, it will affect on environment, and then the beneficiaries can get disease because of not having well fecal sludge management. We are in our treatment site, in our sludge treatment site, there are several types of modules, treatment modules. For the liquid effluent, we are doing E. coli test to reduce pathogen. And for the solid effluent, we are planning to test Almin egg test, so we will be able to provide the dry sludge for the farmers to use as fertilizers. This is the fecal sludge management process that we are doing here in Citywide. Thank you very much.
Great. So the screen. Yes, everyone can put questions in the chat, please. Throughout the session, and there will be some discussion after we can come back from breakout groups. Mr. Said Ullah, unfortunately, we didn't manage to get a video, but we had an interview on chat, so I'm going to read his views. So this is me asking the questions and Said Ullah responding. What is your name? How old are you and where do you live? The response: my name is Mr. Said Ullah. I am 42 years old. I live in Bangladesh refugee camp. Question: since when did you start to work in the sanitation sector, and what is your role and what are your responsibilities? Answer: since 2009, I started to work in the sanitation sector, and my role was a facilities officer in Myanmar, in northern Rakhine state of working with MSF. When I fly to Bangladesh with my family because of the violence. I joined the Bangladesh Red Crescent the 5th of February 2018 in the wash sector sanitation department as a construction supervisor. Can you tell something about what it's like to work in the sanitation in emergency context? And do you like your job and why? Do you feel safe and why? The answer: working with emergency context is not easy. It is like fighting with the enemies, as example, COVID-19. Where doctors and nurses died. Working in the emergency context is the same risk. We need to monitor and we need to we need to make sure that we do our work safely. I like my job very much because sanitation is a very important issue for human beings, and I can share my knowledge with the communities. Also, I can learn from them, from the people that we're serving. Well, I feel partly safe because when I work, I use the full prevention, all the personal protective equipment, and I disinfect a lot. The next question. Are there big differences on how sanitation services are provided by different emergency organizations? Can you explain some of the differences in sanitation worker protection? The answer: yes, there are many differences between different emergency organizations, specifically on the use of PPEs. For example, that we will not share are not using PPEs when they are desludging. Some other organizations who took responsibility to desludge are not using their own desludgers and emptiers and allowing community members to do the dangerous work without any protection or training. The last question. Do you think that global standards on sanitation services would help improve the quality of all sanitation services in the camp? The answer is, I guess so. It would be possible if this would improve collaboration with all organizations undertaking sanitation services. So that was the perspective of Mr. Sarit Ullah, that unfortunately couldn't join us directly due to the time difference. Yes, next slide, please. So now Ida will continue with giving a brief recap of sphere standards in emergencies, how they developed, and also addressing the national standards. So please go ahead, Ida.
Yes, thank you, Marij. Yes, so looking at the standards for sanitation in emergency situations, as you just explained, the Sphere Handbook comes in place. And with a closer look at the sanitation chapter of the Sphere Handbook, it is noticeable that, as also shown in the timeline, that past crises that took place over, let's say, the past 25 years, shaped and developed the progress the Sphere standards made on sanitation. So the first edition of the Sphere standards came shortly after the Rwandan genocide. And during this period, the humanitarian aid was mainly focused on sub-Saharan Africa. And we had the Biafran famine in Nigeria, the Great Lakes refugee crisis, what followed after the Rwandan genocide and resulted in cholera outbreaks in Goma, and also the famine in South Sudan. And these crises lead to a humanitarian approach that was primarily focused on the provision of first aid. The outstretched rural areas in the Horn of Africa offered enough place to big refugee camps and also enough possibilities to build aid facilities. Although the open green fields and endless space, humanitarian operational, had also to deal with communities who weren't actually familiar with toilets. And therefore most of the sanitation in these refugee camps were based on open defecation fields. And from that time onwards, it was recognized that the need for more standardized guidelines was needed for the provision of life-saving assistance. And as a result of, the sanitation chapter of the first edition of the sphere standards was mainly focused on the basic provision of sanitation systems. And from there, the humanitarian focus, as seen in the timeline, slightly changed from the big camps in rural Africa to predominant diverse contexts, including also the more urbanized areas. And humanitarian assistance became more focused on the increased tensions in the Middle East, but also on Southeast Asia, especially after the earthquake in the Indian Ocean. And during this time, the humanitarian spectrum became much broader, more people and organizations involved, and also more diverse and local governments played a more important role. Furthermore, the sanitation approach changed into a more user-focused activity. And as a result, the first revision of the sphere standards in 2004 was a fact. And thereafter, the humanitarian assistance became often entwined in the arena of the so-called complex emergencies. Mainly in the Middle East, large refugee flows and poor sanitation facilities, often contaminated environments leading to large disease outbreaks. But also in 2010, during the aftermath of the Haiti earthquake, when one of the biggest cholera outbreaks took place. And as a result of these disasters, the second revision of the sphere standards was shaped and further developed. And later on, in the third revision of the sphere handbook, safe excreta management was mentioned as one of the main WASH priorities, and also included a wider perspective on all steps of the sanitation chain. And at the same time, the Rohingya crisis started, where thousands of Rohingyas fled the country of Myanmar to find shelter in Bangladesh. And large refugee camps, for example, in Cox's Bazar at the border with Myanmar, housing more than 800,000 refugees, and were often located, Cox's Bazar, in flood-prone areas in Bangladesh. And due to local restrictions, people and goods were no longer allowed to leave the camp, and also fecal sludge needed to remain in the camp. And it was one of the first times humanitarian organizations covered the whole sanitation chain, from containment to disposal. So in the next slide, to summarize, looking at the progression of the sanitation in the sphere handbook over the past 25 years, it is recognized that the provision of sanitation services requires more than just building latrines, but there's no clear guidance or naming of the sanitation service chain included, as well as quantitative effluent quality standards, what makes it very difficult in case national standards are not available or achievable. And in the next slide, if we look at how globally, I think it's there, yeah, globally applied effluent quality standards evolved and developed over time, we need to go back to the year 1915, where the British Royal Commission on Sewage Disposal published the first standards on wastewater discharge in open water bodies. And hold on, yeah, in open water bodies, and with its main attention on chemical oxygen demand and total suspended solids. And the need for a standardized approach in the United Kingdom was mainly due to its rapid industrialization, leading to improperly managed sanitation and wastewater discharge into open water bodies. And therefore, these standards were mainly focused on sewage water that was transported out of the city by large sewage networks, and no attention was paid to pathogens. And in the next slide, from the publication of the first standards in 1915 in the United Kingdom, the standards have been adopted and expanded all over the world, mainly based on wastewater effluent in open water bodies. And it's also notable that from the first standards, that the global north influenced the standards in the global south. And as shown in the table, it gives an overview of globally applied quality standards by different countries, ranging from the high income classes on the left to the low income classes on the right. And of course, it's worth mentioning that this table is based on a quick analysis, and I did it in a short period of time. and there would obviously be more standards available. So I would also like to ask you that if you know more standards that are not yet included in this table, then feel free to share them in the chat or later by email. But for now, looking at the table, it is notable that a wide range of countries and corresponding income classes are having water quality standards for wastewater. And also that in some cases, effluent quality standards in the global south seems even more strict compared to the global north. Although it might be possible that the standards applied in the global south are not always adequately enforced. And this might be validated in the fact that lower income countries are generally not fully connected to adequate sewage networks or treatment facilities. And interesting to see when highlighting in the previous slide is that there are strong similarities among the countries. For example, looking at the pH, having a small range from 5 to 9 between the listed countries, meaning that, well, these are very comparable and what is also normal for vehicles. But in contrast, the total suspended solids have a much broader range compared to the pH, and is ranging from 20 milligrams per liter in India to 200 milligrams per liter in Japan. But they are mainly low, and that means that these standards are mainly liquid-based. And besides that, this overview is also showing that a lot of standards does not exist, showing by emphasizing the gaps between the countries, which are also large in this diagram. So to summarize, many standards are globally available and often influenced by the global north, but not always adapted to the global south. And these are also not always contextualized and sometimes even more strict in the global south. And what is also interesting is that some standards are including specific parameters, like Bangladesh, for example, what is not included in this table, but it's incorporating chlorine and therefore indirect pushing for a specific treatment. It could be questionable if that's always helpful. But in the final slide, I listed, yes, to summarize that also FSM standards are barely available with an exception of the ISO standards and the WHO.
Thank you, thank you, Ide. Before we start a bit early in time, so I will just address some of the questions asked. Thank you for asking questions in the chat. The last one is, are there any accepted global standards for the solid sludge from treatment processes? That's a very good question. We will go through our proposed standards in a minute. And one of the crucial things is that we try to address liquids and solids with disposal standards. But that is also a thing that also Ida spoke about, that many, if national standards exist, then it's generally very liquid focused, right? And not so much solid focused. While if you looked at that infographic that we showed before quickly, that you clearly have a liquid effluent and a solid effluent, and for a safe sanitation surface chain, they need to be addressed both. And that also speaks to another question that was asked: when we speak of safe ex cetera management in emergency situations, does that refer to containment only, or does it include treatment and safe disposal as well? Yeah, so currently the focus in the sphere standards is very much on the containment. And what we are proposing is including sanitation worker safety, desludging, transport, treatment, and disposal and use. So the full chain, but that is currently not really the case. ISO standards are shared. What precautions workers take during desludging during monsoon or heavy rains? How do they respond to wearing PPE during hot days? Yeah, I think that is a clear issue, huh? It's of course heavy work made even heavier in a way through wearing PPEs, but we would still state that it's totally essential for safe surfaces even when it's raining. One more question. Does the normal PPE suits in the COVID pandemic, and some adjustments were made? That's a good question. Somebody else was also asking on if there as any FSM experience during COVID. Maybe in the breakout groups, there can be some discussion on that as well. I know from our own activities where I've been involved in is that PPE did not change, because also my opinion is that even if there's a cholera outbreak, your PPE should be safe regardless. However, I know that, for example, Mr. Said Ullah in Bangladesh, when doing their desludging and transporting, which is done through carrying, it's very difficult to keep distance and stuff. So actually, I think very often it was not possible to do the work fully safe during COVID. Anyway, thank you for those questions. Now we're still a bit early, but I think we will just give you 5 minutes to open the 2 documents that are shared in the chat. There's a link to the sanitation quality standards, and there is a link to the terminology fact sheet. We developed them both. They're both, it's an ongoing process that everyone is doing on a voluntary basis. So it's not perfect or totally finalized yet. But just scroll through quickly and take a few minutes, and then I will take you through the standards together when we continue. So shall we say we continue in like in my time zone 18:45, so in 6 minutes from now. Cool. So everybody can take some time to take a glass of water and check both links, and then we'll continue the discussion in 5 minutes from now. Okay, so I hope you all had a chance to for a little bit of movement and to see both documents very quickly. And of course, they will remain accessible to read after the session as well. As I said, the process towards these standards has been that there has been a couple of interviews with FSM experts within and outside the technical working group. We defined 3 alternative approaches, basically being one set of standards, very minimal and simple, one set of standards with a phased approach, but focusing on the liquid, and then another one, which is the current, which also was voted for. It's a phased approach, but also really considering both the liquid and solid effluent, but we'll go through it in a minute. We had a digital event, a satellite event of the annual partner meeting of the Global Wash Cluster to discuss and vote on these 3 standards. Then another round of interviews and feedback. And now we have, since today, the newest version, but it's still under discussion. So we're really looking forward to hear your views. And also a couple of the people that are in this room helped contribute, like Strande and Tineke Hoijmans. So nice to see you here. Okay, now I will go through the slides. I'm warning you, this will be a few minutes of a lot of talking and a lot of text. I'll try to touch on it quickly just to make sure we're all on the same page when we try to discuss if these standards also would have use outside of the emergency sector or not. So basically we defined 2 main standards, and this is really sphere language, huh? So don't judge us too much on that. First standards is environment free from human, etc. There are no human feces present in the environment in which people live, learn, and work. And then there's a couple of key actions defined, which we will go through in a second. And the second standard is access is provided to safe sanitation systems. The selection of safe sanitation systems should be context specific, thus respond to local, physical, social, and institutional conditions. Sanitation systems are considered safe when the below listed actions are taken. This standard has been divided in 4 indicators. First is talking more on the on-site solution, right, which is already mostly included in sphere. So talking about the type of toilet and latrine and pit. The second is talking about sanitation worker safety. The third is talking about the sludge and transport of fecal sludge. And the fourth indicator is talking about treatment and disposal. So now I'll go through the key actions. It will be a lot of text and I will not go into detail on everything. So the key actions for the first standard is to decontaminate any feces contaminated living, learning, and working space. And also to prioritize elimination of open defecation, followed by a rapid upscaling of access to safe sanitation systems universally implemented, covering the full target population. Next slide, please. The second, this is where it gets bad with text on the slide. This is talking really on that on-site solution, right? So basically what we say, you should always involve users before, during, and after the design. For example, using Sani tweets. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that's a very big, great approach. Minimum 1 toilet per 20 people. Distance between dwelling and shared toilet max 50 meter. Consider access to specific groups, right? Like toilets need to be safe, accessible for everyone. So you need sex segregated, you need lighting, you need locks, you need specific toilets for people with special needs. But also talking about, for example, what a septic tank should discharge to, and the distance, the minimum distance between the bottom of the pit or infiltration trench and the groundwater should be minimum 1.5 meter. And that also hand washing should be always provided, hand washing facilities. Next slide, please. Also still talking on this on-site sanitation technology is that, of course, menstrual hygiene management should be catered for. The special needs, the sex segregation. Yeah, that basically people should be able to maintain their toilet. So they need to be cleanable and people should have the means and material to clean it. But then I think the biggest addition that we made now is to, just that last point, identify if there is a need for the desludging, transport, and treatment of fecal sludge, or if the on-site sanitation facility can be considered a safe sanitation system. And how to identify that talks about if the groundwater meter is deep enough. So is your are you not contaminating your groundwater? So that basically means if you're not contaminating, you don't have to contain completely. And if you don't have to contain, maybe you would not need the whole sanitation service chain. So you don't need to, you're not, so in those cases when you're not polluting the groundwater, when you don't need to contain the whole pit, when basically each household has their own latrine, so the fill-up rate is not so quick, and very important, if there is sufficient space available for when a pit is full and it can be closed and a new pit can be dug out, and people have information and means on how to do that safely. In those cases, just the on-site pit latrine can be a safe system. In those cases, you don't need that full sanitation service chain of desludging, transport, and treatment. In emergency cases, it can actually be really safer to not implement that whole chain. But next slide, please. There's also cases when those conditions do not apply. So for example, in the urban context or in a very cramped refugee context with so many users per toilet, or when you're in a context with high groundwater or flood risks, in those cases, you do need to consider the whole sanitation service chain. And according to the new standards, it is actually not allowed to build latrines without properly considering the long-term full surface chain. And if you considering that, what does it mean? It means that you have to build a construction that's actually desludgeable, right? You need to line because it's difficult and sometimes unsafe to desludge unlined latrines. You have to really make sure that you don't, that you do contain sufficiently to not impact public health. And also hygiene promotion component should be incorporated. And only in those cases, the rest of all the standards apply. So basically, if you would identify that the on-site solution is sufficient, then that's it. But if that's not the case, then, so because you're in that urban, refugee, high groundwater context, then all the other standards apply. Next slide, please. First of the next indicators is on the sanitation worker safety. So the health risk of sanitation workers should be minimized, and that can be done through personal protective equipment, gloves, masks, full overalls, and closed waterproof footwear, facilities to wash with water and soap after work, facilities for cleaning, disinfection, maintenance, and storage of the PPEs, and vaccination and deworming. And somebody in the chat mentioned, like, what does it mean during, during floods and monsoons? And it's true, just the provision of PPEs alone, it's obviously not enough. You need to constantly follow up and train and work with your teams that the PPEs are safely used, because it's very natural to at some point stop using them. And you need to ensure that sanitation workers are trained on the risk of handling wastewater and fecal sludge. And to make sure that people are properly trained, you need to avoid rotation. Thank you. Then the indicator on desludging and transport. Basically, you need to avoid direct contact between fecal sludge and the sanitation workers or beneficiaries. So use technologies that minimize splashing or contact. Wherever possible, motorized emptying and transport should be prioritized over manual emptying and transport, and ensure worker safety, as is discussed under indicator 2.2. Next one, please. This is the last one. Fecal sludge is safely treated and disposed of. And this entails is that the treatment plan should be designed and operated according to the local disposal possibilities and specific end use and disposal objective, as described in a table that I will show in a second. So basically, you need to define first what you will do with your effluent, both the liquid and the solid, based on what's possible and based on your end use or disposal route, which can be infiltration or discharge to open water body or reuse, or burning, burying, or reuse. Based on what you will do, you need to design your treatment. Ensure that regardless of the source, always both liquid and solid fractions are treated before end use and disposal. Process control and monitoring systems should be in place based on the specific disposal route. Adopt a phased approach as a standard. So basically what we say, during the first emergency phase, the main focus is public health. So focus on a rapid scale up to work, scale up toward 100% surface, basically quickly increase your volumes treated, for example, to surfing the whole target population, and focus really only on pathogens. So that's helminth and E. coli. And for that first phase, we decided to have more focus. But after emergency phase, both treatment, liquid and solid should comply with national standards. However, as Ida just discussed, there are cases where national standards cannot be met because they maybe not exist or only exist for liquids, or there's another reason that there is a deviation required. And according to our proposal, this deviation is permissible with the agreement of host government when reasons are carefully documented. In those cases, the treatment plant should be designed and meet standards as defined in the table that I will show now. So next slide, please. Yes. So this is also a lot of text. Please take your time to go to it a bit more rest. But what we did, left side is the liquid effluent, and rest is the treated effluent and the treated solids. What we basically say is, are conditions in place for safe reuse? So that's what we said, is that basically reuse should always be promoted, but on-site. So if there's enough space for on-site reuse, and when you have the information and means and materials for safe handling, then implement conform national legislation or standards on reuse. If those are not existing, comply with WHO guidelines on safe reuse of wastewater. And the implementing agency is required to prove that the system is safe. If those conditions do not apply, when there's not enough space for on-site reuse, you can say, are conditions in place for safe infiltration? So then you talk about groundwater and infiltration capacity. If that's the case, if infiltration can be done safe, then impact is considered minimal on environment and public health. So no monitoring or liquid effluent is required. However, proper separation of solids and liquid is essential for long-term infiltration. And then the last one is our conditions in place for safe discharge to surface water body. And then we defined minimum standards based actually on easy monitoring of E. coli, or not easy, but relatively easy, not needing a full lab, E. coli, helmet, total solids, COD, ammonia, and pH. So that's for the liquid. For the solids, I'm almost done. Don't worry. The same thing, our conditions in place for safe reuse, mainly focused on space and means and knowledge. Then our conditions in place for safe burying. And then if burying can be done, there is no requiring of monitoring. However, you need to make sure that places are fenced and to consider long-term, specifically helmet presence. So you need to make sure you don't harm the groundwater quality because it's deep enough and the water source is further than 30 meters away, and you need to be able to fence your site. If that's all not possible and you need to burn, then that is only possible if the treated solid fraction is dried enough and if your chimney is high enough to not impact the health of people living around the treatment plant. And no monitoring is required because burning is considered very safe. Next slide, please. So basically what we want to do is to use 2.10 this table to identify the most suitable disposal route and corresponding standards in case of deviation from national standards, so only when they don't exist. Based on this identified disposal route and corresponding standards, treatment plant design and operational management should be produced. And then there's a couple of extra things that you need to fence your treatment plant and that they should be located far from houses, and that all the PPEs and cleaning tools should be available. So yes, next slide, please. Those are our proposal. And now what we wanted to ask you with the poll is, in your work in development, for most of you, do you experience the standard gap? So basically that it's that the national governments have or do not have workable quality standards for your FSM services, or not. And if you don't experience this gap, would it be possible to maybe share the national standards of your country in the chat, or maybe also through mail, because we're trying to create an overview. We see answers coming in. It's interesting, huh? It's quite a mix in the answers. However, for now, a lot of votes coming in now. The far majority seems to have experienced the gap, but also actually quite considerable, 30% now have worked in a country where FSM standards were enforced. Maybe we'll give it a few more seconds. But now 65% voted. Meanwhile, I'll just answer the latest question. How can standard sanitation infrastructure be quickly adapted to field needs in emergencies like floods, wildfires, earthquakes, where disaster resilient infrastructure may not exist in the short term? Yeah, that's a very big question. Huh? I have the feeling that the challenge is not mainly only the technology, but also understanding and implementation. Standard gaps exist for the solid matter. Can you share some example? Yeah, exactly. So it is very often there is a liquid standard, but not solids, huh? Yeah. Okay, so the poll stopped. We have 88% that have experienced this gap and 66% that did not work in a country where FSM standards were enforced, but 30% did. So there is actually quite a nice mix there. And feel free, please, to share national standards in the chat if you have them. Okay, so now I think we move to our breakout groups. It will be a little bit shorter than we anticipated. Let's do 20 minutes. There's a bit of instruction. Please click in the chat. Oh, sorry for this noise.
I have it.
Yeah, okay. So there is a link in the chat. Please click on it and it will be the slide that yourself in your breakout group. What you need to do is click on the link that's just shared by Laura in the chat. As you're being sent to your room, take note of your room number. It will be written. It will say you're going to room 2 or room 3. Once you're in your room, nominate one person to open the discussion material and share screen and go to the slide that corresponds to your room number. And then answer the questions. If we go to the next slide, we can quickly show one of those slides. So basically, this is for room 1, it's right down. And then the topics or questions are, first top line is emergency, the lower line is development. Top 3 ideas to increase adoption of sanitation quality standards in emergencies. And top 3 perceived obstacles to putting standards to use, like ideas why it would be difficult, or also maybe challenges or points for improvements that you see. And then the development, that I think it's very interesting to use this forum to discuss that. Could these sanitation quality standards also be used outside of the emergency context? If so, how? And perceived challenges in applying these standards outside of emergency. So we'll, look forward to this review. And then when we come back, we'll have 10 minutes to feedback.
And I just want to point out that you can, once you locate your room's slide, you can add notes into the slide, and we'd ask that you do add notes. That way we can have this record coming out of the meeting, especially as we look at how to scale up or increase adoption and look at the application of these outside of the emergency context. So yes, just take notes, please. Thank you. All right, I'm sending everyone into their breakout rooms now.
Hi, Laura, I'm leaving now.
I Roshan, I saw you sitting there. It's nice to see you. It's been a while.
Yeah, so you go ahead. So I'm leaving now, so I have something to do. Yeah,
Okay.
I'll see you tomorrow. Yeah, bye.
Yeah, bye.
Bye-bye.
Genevieve, I'm gonna pause the recording because it won't capture the breakout rooms anyways. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's okay. There's Elise. There's still one person that seems not to be in the breakout room.
Okay, I'll make sure they are assigned to something.
Because we do have only 5 minutes left, right?
6 minutes, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so that will be short.
Okay. I'm gonna close the room, so then they'll just come back. It usually gives them like a minute countdown.
Yeah, so then actually only the 5 minutes, it will be short.
We do have their slides, just so you know. So
sorry?
You just have a couple groups share back.
Yeah. Yeah, so everybody's coming back. Welcome back. So we only have 5 more minutes, so it's not a lot of feedback time. Would anybody want to volunteer to give a very quick recap of mainly I think what would be interesting to focus on is that third question, that like applicability of standards in a developmental context would it be possible? And if so, how and what would be challenges? Would anybody be interested to feedback on that?
I'm volunteering.
Thank you.
Marai, we had an interesting discussion in our room one, and the point is, yes, it would make sense because often existing standards are perceived not to be attainable and therefore not followed. But we see that it requires probably either a license to contravene for a time period or a zoning to say this area we allow emergency standards and not national standards, or another third level. Maybe Heinz-Peter, you can help. There were 3 elements and we have written them all down in our chat on our slide. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, yeah. So also saying that those standards, bit of clear definition of space and time. It can be, we had the same, like as sort of starting up with any other group. Thank you for volunteering.
Yeah, we room number 2, representing several of my fellow roomies. We really focus mostly on question 1 and 2 from an emergency context, but since you're asking about the development, yeah, our perspective is, you know, those same the same standards, and I want to include one very important one, which is, I think Nandini pointed out about providing PPE, but not just a physical PPEs, but vaccinations, you know, so that you are truly protecting the workers. I thought that was just an awesome, you know, point. But in the context, the third question, yeah, definitely, but you need to consider the long-term sustainability, you know, rather than the emergency. And also continued monitoring and also adjusting what you're doing as you're implementing it. And so while there may be standards that you can follow, you also need to be flexible in case things are not working quite right. So I think that, you know, to Stefan's point about, you know, the long-term aspects. And anyway, so I'll stop with that. Thank you.
Can I drop in just from room number 2? Hello?
Yes, please.
Hello. Thank you, Sue. Actually, what we are doing, I am very glad to share with you what we have done. We have given 2 doses of the vaccinations to all our frontline and sanitary workers. Okay, so in this kind of pandemic situation, it is very important that not only you give physical PPEs, but you have to put their confidence in place that they're absolutely safe, kind of a thing, so that you can ensure the quality. So that is one thing we have done. And thank you, Sue. He has very aptly pointed out all our discussion. And one very important we have done, we are continuously monitoring 24/7. Because in emergency, you have to, you know, you have to not only build the capacity, but you have to also decentralize the monitoring system. That's what we have done. We have done monitoring system built into our urban local bodies units, in the central headquarter, in the state level headquarter, and that's why we are monitoring 24/7. So that's 2 very important things which we have done in West Bengal, India, and we are perfectly doing well without any hazards as of now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And that's a very important thing. In the proposed standards, we say vaccination and deworming actually also, even though there has been some discussion on that also, because not always the possibility is there, right? Like in that very emergency situation, but you can at least aim for it and plan in the future. And thank you for sharing that experience in India, also with the COVID pandemic, of course, which must be crazy challenging. We're already at the end of the session. We're happy that we saw you write using the slides to write, so we'll have some time to read back and think and see if we can still adjust our standards a bit. I would like to thank all of you for joining us. And also, when you have a bit more time to read the standards and the fact sheet, if there's any ideas or opinions, please reach out. This is an ongoing participatory process, so We're looking forward to hear from you. My email address is in the invitation, but also on the slides, which will be shared. And yes, I would like to close the session now. I don't know if Ida or Lara would still want to say something. No?
No, I'm just going to say that I'm actually going to throw your email in the chat so that it's available there as well.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so thank you all, and enjoy the rest of the FSM6.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Good night.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.